It's interesting. I would pose, I'm already kind of writing the future op-ed in my head. Which nations are those through the history of which violence does not run, other than Switzerland? So, let's look at the national history. Who doesn't have that kind of blood on their hands throughout? So is the United States really so exceptional there, or are we just choosing to ignore obvious signs of progress in order to tell an exciting story? Because that's what I'm thinking right now. Let's say that violence does run throughout our history. Does it not run throughout the history of France, Russia, China, India? Take your pick. Where is it that that's not true? You're talking about humanity. And so that's a very interesting indictment of America alone.
It is interesting. So Martin Luther King, who obviously, led the March on Washington, everyone can drape themselves in his words, depending on what your objectives are. But, as we've been doing research on what we are going to do in August, I came across some words that Martin Luther King said in 1962. And it was on the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. And just listen to these words, quote, "If our nation," to your point, John, right? The history of nations, "if our nation had done nothing more in its whole history than to create just two documents, its contribution to civilization would be imperishable. The first of these documents is the Declaration of Independence, and the other is the Emancipation Proclamation. All tyrants, past, present, and future, are powerless to bury the truths in these declarations, no matter how extensive their legions, how vast their power, and how malignant their evil." End quote. I was blown away when I read those words from Martin Luther King. It was a 100-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And what he was saying there is that unlike other nations, this nation had created just these two documents that established the inherent dignity of each individual. And that was radical. That was a radical idea to the rest of humanity. And so that's also what we need to celebrate as we commemorate these events. And so when we talk about who speaks for Black America, we need to create a level playing field of who's having these arguments.
I would also add the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I mean, just to explicitly outlaw legalized segregation in that way. That was a major step. That wasn't just some minor historical detail. And just the whole mood shift, the whole socio-psychological shift in this country towards reviling racism in the way that one must, at least on the surface, and with a great many people, most of them white, also today, deep down. That's weird. We're pioneers in that. It's other nations who are following us in that. And of course, there was no way to know that in 1962, but I'll bet King would have felt the same way. That, really, really big stuff has happened here, despite the glaring imperfections. Yeah, certainly.
The conundrum I think we face today is that you just cited the Civil Rights Act and how radical it was in deliberately eliminating this kind of behavior. But there are those who speak for Black America who say today nothing has changed, right?
It's window dressing, right? Yeah.
You just said a bit earlier in this conversation, Ian, when we were asking about the NAACP, the Urban League and whatnot, you say they take their lead from Black Lives Matter. And I think that's correct, that the way the winds are blowing, the energy in the quote unquote, the movement, the streets, the authenticity and the authority of the streets is not with you in terms of valorizing King 1962. They're going to tell you King 1967, Riverside Church objecting to the Vietnam War. They're going to tell you King 1968, Poor People's Campaign, or Memphis garbage workers strike, where he's protesting or objecting to poverty or capitalism from the left. And they're going to say all of this romantic incantation of the flowery language about the Enlightenment and the Declaration and the et cetera. are passé. They're gonna invoke Malcolm X. They're gonna celebrate the Black Panthers. They're gonna talk about a balled up fist, and they're gonna valorize the movement, quote unquote, the movement that broke out in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, which dominated the domestic politics of this country for the better part of a year, as combating against the very same white supremacy that led to slavery and that led to our oppression under Jim Crow. So when you say who speaks for Black Americans, I mean, I can tell you what, I mean, I don't know, I'll just make up a name. Robin D.G. Kelly, professor of history at UCLA and a prolific writer on the left, an advocate for Black agitation and uprising, would say, and it sure as the hell ain't you.
It is not me, but what have we gotten for all that? What have we gotten in the last few years of the rhetoric and action around Black Lives Matter or ideals of defunding the police? I mean, I was just in San Francisco a few days ago, you know, for a family holiday. And I mean, have you guys been to San Francisco recently?
Oddly enough, yesterday. And so
you got me beat. I was about to say my son lives in San Francisco and I visit him often, but yesterday.
Okay, so I know what you're going to say because me too. Yeah,
I was stunned. We went down to the sort of Tenderloin. You know, we were driving to Tenderloin and Mission. Open air drug dealing, people high as a kite, filth, dirt everywhere. And by the way, people of every race. People of every race.
Yeah, it's not just a brown thing. No.
Yeah, it was quite striking. It was quite striking. And, you know, London, you know, again, talking about Black Lives Matter, what have we gotten? What have we gotten from all this? 2-3 years ago, the mayor of San Francisco, let's defund the police. We gotta, you know, the police are terrible. It's all because of anti-Black racism and oppression. Well, 3 years later, what have we gotten? And everyone in San Francisco, everyone throughout California was telling me, "Oh yeah, no, it's bad. I mean, it was kind of bad before, but it has skyrocketed."
It's like another planet. It's scary. It's sad. It's tragic. I've never seen anything quite like it. The worst I had seen was some of the worst parts of Newark, say 15 years ago, downtown Newark, where I thought this is just utterly broken. San Francisco now makes that look like Dubai. It's scary. Absolutely.
So, Glenn, it's frustrating, Glenn, because you're right. They'll throw all this rhetoric in our face, but when you look at what's actually happening in communities across the country, including the school, you know, in the communities in which I've just launched our own high schools in the Bronx, people are suffering under the weight of these well-intended but still grossly misguided policies.